Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I am Tyler here with my brother Ryan. Today we are breaking down the Dallas Cowboys 2024 offseason with all of the departures and acquisitions that they acquired, as well as reviewing the draft class. And we will wrap up the video going over their 2024 schedule and providing our 2024 record prediction on how we think the Cowboys are going to do in the 2024 season. So be sure to stay tuned in all the way to the very end of the video. But before we get into it, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also ring that bell to get notified whenever we create new content. We have videos coming out Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We're in the middle of our 2024 offseason recap here. This last video for the NFC East. We've already done the both South divisions, and we have the rest of the league as well to be doing. That's going to be coming out every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So be sure to ring that bell and subscribe to the channel. Ryan, thanks for pulling this up here. I think starting off, this Cowboys team, top-notch performance. I think they ran into an absolute buzzsaw on the Green Bay Packers in the 2024 wild card. But this might be, and it pains me to say this just because if you're a longtime viewer of the station or of the channel, props to Mike McCarthy as well for the team that he put together last year. I think him and Dan Quinn did a really good job offensively and defensively. It's probably one of the best Cowboys team I've seen in a long time. I think they just ran into an absolute buzzsaw. And what I'm going to be very curious on, ironically, Dan Quinn, who really changed that defense, his last game as a Cowboys was giving up 48 or so points to the Green Bay Packers. I'm very curious how this defense rebounds because we're going to get into this here in a second. But a lot of defensive players moved on from the team, and half of them followed to Dan Quinn to Washington. Not the most notable players, but still just some good key depth players. They have a couple guys that are also still free agents as well on the defensive side that we're going to get into here in a second. But just looking at these numbers, overall, one of the best teams in the league statistically. Dak Prescott had an amazing year offensively. CeeDee Lamb had the quietest, almost record-breaking season. Like, I didn't even know he was that close to a record-breaking season.
He had the 7th most receiving yards in a single season last year, and I feel like nobody even talked about it.
Yeah, I feel like nobody was talking about it at all. Not until it was, like, really close. Like, what was his here? Let me even pull this up as well. I need to see if I can pull up his stats. Because there's one – I think it was the Lions game. I think the controversial Lions game was the one where he had, like, 250-something yards. And that's when it was like, oh, wow, hey, he's having a really good season. Like, yeah, he's having an amazing season. And so, but I kind of want to throw it over to you here while I look up the stats. But what was your overall take from the Dallas team in 2023 and kind of some of the main areas that they needed to address come this offseason?
Yeah, so for me, they just did everything really well. They were an elite passing offense. They were a good running offense. They didn't allow very many sacks. I do think you could start to see some of the aging and loss that they've had on that offensive line over the years. But still, 15th amongst sacks allowed. That's pretty good. They were 3rd in turnovers allowed or giveaways with only 16 throughout the year. So really, really solid there. And one thing I will say is this offense and defense played so well together. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, in the Washington video, but Dan Quinn did such a great job of scheming up defenses that were paired with extremely high-powered offenses because he would allow DBs to kind of sit back and wait for offenses to have to throw into him. And when you're going up against the offense with the 5th most yards in the NFL, you have to keep up. You are not going to beat this team by playing good defense, protecting the football, and playing the field position game because this team will put up points. And I think then you go to the defensive side of the ball. They were an average rushing defense. They had more pressures than sacks, I believe, but still, a bunch of sacks. They generated a good bit of turnovers, and this passing defense was really good last year. And I will say part of the reason why I think this passing defense was good was because of teams had to keep up. They had to take risks to keep up with this offense. So that to me, I think was a part of that. Also, you had Deron Bland with I think 6 or 7 pick sixes last year, which was an NFL record. Stephon Gilmore had a really good year for them as well. And this is all with the absence of their top corner in Trayvon Diggs. So I will say going into it, being a little bit better against the run is probably what I would be most concerned about, especially you look at what the Packers were able to do. They ran the ball right at Micah Parsons and were able to kind of shut him down a
Well,
little
I
bit
would
there
even
in
use
that playoff game.
I would use a different example, probably a better one, but that Buffalo Bills game.
Yeah, that's another good one.
I think that was the one where you're just like, think it's going to be this great back and forth game. And I think Josh Allen didn't even break 100 passing yards that game. Because like, hey, we're just going to keep handing James Cook because we're just going to run down.
That was also Joe Brady's first game as the OC, I believe.
Yeah, it was a pretty good showing. And so I will say, going back to CeeDee Lamb here real quick, the reason why no one really knew about it till the very end, till this Lions game, which was week 17, where he had 227 yards. But Tyreek Hill had 50 more receiving yards than him. So that's probably everybody was looking at Tyreek Hill. And so it's still just an amazing season from CeeDee Lamb. So I'm very curious to see. It's going to be tough to replicate, obviously, but it's not unrealistic. I mean, with 17 games now, it's averaging 100 receiving yards a game. That's not that crazy to think that CeeDee Lamb could potentially do that again with this offense, especially then too with Mike McCarthy as the offensive coordinator there. So let's move on though now to the people that left the organization. Biggest ones here are going to be up top to start off, but Tyler Biadasz. Did I get it right?
Yes.
I'm just saying like Tyler Badaz or something like that. I think that sounds cooler. But Tyron Smith, Michael Gallup, and then Dorrance Armstrong Jr. as well. Those to me, I think, are probably a couple of top guys. Are going to be the main, most notable guys. I would say Leighton Manderesh is a big one as well, but he retired, and that was known. He didn't go off into another organization. I wish nothing but the best for you there, Leighton. But I think here, looking at the offensive line pieces that are moving on, I think that's just going to be very interesting to see how they develop, because we're going to get into here in a second how they didn't really replace too much just for whatever reason. But I think a lot of it may be saving up money for 2025 and some of their salary cap space from there to help pay for Dak Prescott's big contract. We could speculate that later on throughout the season. But though a lot of these guys though did end up following Dan Quinn to Washington. And so, Ryan, when you see this list here, who do you think is going to be the biggest guy that is going to be missed?
Tyron Smith from 4 years ago, I think is what they really missed, because I think even this offensive line slightly struggled in the last season and maybe the season before. But Tyron Smith was a staple at that left tackle spot for them for a lot of years, and so losing him, I think, is a big one. But the combination of him and Tyler Biadasz in the same offseason is a big loss. Those were the two probably really key pieces that were there. Michael Gallup was not quite the same after his injuries, and then just the defensive depth. You see 2 defensive tackles, 2 edge rushers. Leighton Vander Esch was a big loss. I think he broke his neck against Green Bay, and that was like his 3rd neck break in his football career, because he had one at Boise State, one early on in his Cowboys career, and they thought he was going to have to retire, and now this one. So, I think the sum of all of these losses are really big. And then also, I think you look, Stephon Gilmore was, I know Deron Blanton had the flashy stats, but Stephon Gilmore is still a top 15 NFL corner in today's game, and he's still a free agent. So I think that's really interesting to see what he ends up coming to.
Yeah, potentially. He's a top 15. I mean, he is still a free agent, but also his asking price could be very high.
Yeah, that's why. But he's 32 or 33. Like, he only has 1 to 2 years left, I think, playing at a decently high level. So
I hope the Falcons, Terry, if you're watching this, pick up Stephon. So that's the Falcons. Cowboys don't pick him up. You guys won't like him. But I agree. Yeah, I think just the overall depth is going to be interesting to see how this goes in overall development, especially then, too, when we segue over to their acquisitions. Didn't really add anybody at all. They did get Eric Kendricks as well, but then they signed Zeke and then Royce Freeman as well at 2 running back positions. If there's anybody that we missed on here, please let us know in the comments. We're trying to do a good job here, but just looking at this list, it's something similar, I think, then also to the Colts as well. They only signed 2 people, like Joe Flacco and somebody else, but they just didn't have that many offseason moves, like major offseason moves. The people that they did.
Hold on, I'm going to go back. one departure that we left off was Tony Pollard. He is not on this list, but I
Oh
just
yeah,
wanted to make that known because sometimes the list we were looking at doesn't show trades; they only show free agent moves.
oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so Tony Pollard is not on this list, and that was a
Well,
fairly important part of
Tony
their
Pollard
offense.
signed in free agency though. He wasn't traded.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I don't know. We just
that's
I guess
over
we
the
just missed
cap.
it.
Over the cap. You got it. No, I might have just missed it.
Yeah,
Anyways, yeah.
yeah,
Tony Pollard as well is gone, but they end up bringing back Zeke and then also have Royce Freeman as well. But in
yeah,
general, though, not too many additions at all. They mainly re-signed some key
yeah.
guys as well. Draft wise, though, I thought they did a fine job in the draft. Nothing crazy, but not anything I would really overly question.
Yeah. I wasn't in love with it. I was not a big fan of switching Tyler Guyton right away to left tackle, and that seems like what they're going to do with him, or switching him from right tackle to left tackle. That's
Yeah,
not an easy transition uh, to make, especially at such a high level. The only thing that's saving Tyler Guyton, in my opinion, is just the fact that he was already really raw as a right tackle, so he hasn't had years and years of reps at right tackle. So maybe learning that muscle memory or relearning that muscle memory just opposite is going to be a little easier for him. So I also wasn't a big fan of Marshawn Nealand at 56. I thought he was a late day 2, early day 3 guy. But so again, I just not the most not the picks I would have made in this spot. So
yeah,
I I do like the players. Just again, tough spot. They didn't really add too much of free agency. I don't think they had a ton of cap space, if I remember right. But let's get
yeah,
into their offensive depth chart here. So starting out, wide receivers: Jalen Tolbert, third year guy from South Alabama; Brandon Cooks and C.D. Lamb. Pretty good 3 wide receiver set right there. Jalen Tolbert, I think, has struggled a little bit with injuries in the past couple seasons. Left tackle, Tyler Guyton, like I mentioned on the last slide. Tyler Smith, Brock Hoffman, Zach Martin, and then Terrence Steele at right tackle. Really kind of curious to see what happens here, especially at that center spot. Does Cooper Beebe kind of kick in because Brock Hoffman was a free agent, undrafted free agent from 2022. So curious to see how that pans out. And then going into the tight ends and the running backs, Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, Peyton Hendershot, 3 tight ends that we all probably know pretty well with how often they run them. Dak Prescott, Zeke, Rico Dowell, Deuce Vaughn, and then Hunter Lupke there at the fullback spot. So all in all, I think for me, the big storyline is how does this offensive line shake out? Who ends up playing center? Does Tyler Smith kick out to tackle and Tyler Guyton take a developmental year, or what goes on there?
yeah. No, I that's obviously going to be the biggest storyline, and then I would say then the sub storyline from that one. But look at this, and once again, if you watch the channel a lot, you know my opinions on running backs in the league. But I just kind of look at these guys, and it's like, are you expecting Zeke to be the number one guy? Like, I just don't
Yeah,
think that's going to work out, especially then too behind an offensive line that's already seems questionable,
yeah,
just because of the pieces that have been lost. Rico Dowdle, he was the clear number 2 running back last year. He had 89 carries on 361 yards, and then he did have 17 catches out of the backfield for 144 yards and a couple of touchdowns to go along with it. So I guess maybe it'll be kind of running back by committee, but Rico will still be the main guy. But it's if that is going to be if they have faith in Rico that he's going to be the guy in between in between the 20s, and then Zeke's going to be the red zone guy, kind of like how it was with Tony Pollard there. Like, okay, I can see that and whatnot. And then that's all going to hinge then on how well this offensive line develops. That's going to be the biggest
yeah,
thing for sure. But if the offensive line is there, and then they decide that Zeke's going to be the main running back, I'm just very curious how that's going to pan out long term. So that'll be something that's going to be very interesting to see overall. But I agree with you though. It's all a moot point if this offensive line doesn't develop well, and if Tyler Guyton
yeah,
doesn't pan out at left tackle, and then if Brock Hoffman is going to be the new center. Very curious to see how Cooper Beebe does because We had him as offensive guard just on the previous slide, but just interior offensive line. Uh, Potentially, like you can move around, and maybe they got him specifically to play center there and fill that void. Because if so, then they did replace Tyron Smith and Tyler Biotis there. So I have to see how
Yeah.
they develop. But
But
that'll be
that's
very interesting to see.
we talked a little bit about this with Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox with the Eagles. It's like, okay, yes, you replace them, but those are two Pro Bowl. I mean, Tyron Smith is a Hall of Fame left tackle. Like
Yeah,
those don't just grow on trees. Like
yeah,
those are hard guys to find. So really interested to kind of see not only did they replace them, but like did they actually fill the hole that those guys left in on their depth chart. So let's
yeah.
move on now to the defensive depth chart, where I think there's maybe less questions. I think more questions around like the formation and kind of like what style of defense will they run. With Demarcus Lawrence, Maisie Smith, Osa Odigizua, Mika Parsons, kind of the front four there. You have Damone Clark, Eric Kendricks at the linebacker spot. And then Trayvon Diggs, Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, Deron Bland, and then Jordan Lewis kind of filling out the secondary there. And I mean, a lot of these guys are pretty set. I'm a little curious to see how Trayvon Diggs does recovering from his ACL tear. But other than that, I think this is probably a pretty solid group that are pretty established.
Yeah, I think everything's still going to run around Mika Parsons. So having just good role player guys to benefit him, he's going to get his fair share. Because let me go look at it last year too. How many sacks? I mean, yeah, 14 sacks. That's okay, I guess. In a single season, that's not horrible production by a single player. So he's going to get obviously his
Yeah.
fair share. And so I think when you go and lose a guy like Dorrance Armstrong, who was the second guy at 7.5, it just making sure that you feel confident that you can go and find a replacement for him to just go and replace those sacks, even if it's through a couple of guys. So I think it's just kind of having that depth, finding those role players, keep developing.
Yeah.
But to your point, though, like how's Trayvon Diggs going to come back from his ACL tear? Fortunately enough, it was very early on in the season. I think it was still mid-September or something
It's like week
that.
3.
It was in between week 3, yeah, because the
Yeah.
Cardinals beat them that week. So it was
Yeah.
still very early on. So he will be fully well rested and repaired just with thanks to modern technology. So I agree with you though. It will be just kind of their overall philosophy and their formation change now that Dan Quinn has moved on, just to see how they go and develop. But let's move on now to their 2024 season and it's kind of break down some of their games here, starting with on the road at Cleveland. Ryan, you'll be watching this game just because of a very special someone will be making his first announcing game. It's Tom Brady's first game.
Yeah, it
So
is.
I can tell you're excited about it. But then hosting New Orleans, Baltimore is going to be the big one as well. I think that's going to be Baltimore is a Super Bowl contender. Really going to want to go and see how they fare up against Lamar Jackson and that team. That's going to be a good barometer test. So I think I said that correctly. But then at New York and then at Pittsburgh, some primetime games there, and then Detroit. Very interesting start to the season because really don't know how New Orleans is going to pan out or Pittsburgh. And the Giants they're probably going to be better than the Giants. But then they have 3 tough games. I would say like at Cleveland, starting off with the new season, Baltimore as well, and then Detroit. Those are 3 tough games that I'm probably not going to favor
No.
Dallas in those games.
No, because I think you look like Cleveland, Baltimore, and Detroit, their defenses are equal or better depending on the matchup. And I think all of those teams have I don't want to say a better offense, because I I would say a more balanced offense. Detroit runs the ball really, really well, and then they also have some really good receivers. Baltimore, with Derrick Henry now, especially, I think that running game is going to take on a whole new level. Lamar just had his best season as a thrower, and then Cleveland, we'll see kind of what Deshaun Watson's able to do as he comes back for them as well. But like, I think all those teams they match up well against the Cowboys. And then the other 3, I think New Orleans maybe the Giants. That's a division game. Pitt, New Orleans, I think they should win those games. So coming out of these
So
first 6, 3-3.
So I'll add on to your first point, maybe rephrase a little bit, but I think
Yeah.
at Cleveland, Baltimore, and Detroit, those are three teams that can put up 35 points. And
Yes.
that's going to be
Yeah.
a team they can run with the Cowboys. New
Yeah.
Orleans and Pittsburgh, I don't think they could do that. We'll have to see. I mean,
Yeah.
Arthur Smith's going to be the new coordinator in Pittsburgh, so probably won't be able to get to 20 points. But New Orleans, that's been their kryptonite as well. It's like they start off really slow in the first three quarters, and then they put up a lot of points because teams play prevent defense, and then they can go down and score touchdowns because nobody's guarding anybody at that point. But by that point, Dallas would already be up 21 points or something. And so I think that then this is going to be the Cowboys' kryptonite. It's just going to be winning those close shootout games because if they obviously they're going to regress, I think, on the defensive side of the ball. Dan Quinn moving on, a couple of key pieces moving on as well. They're just depth. Maybe not key pieces, but just good depth overall.
Yeah.
Is they need to be able to win those 38, 35 football games, and that offense is going to have to click. So the offensive line is going to have to be prepared. So that's where I think it's going to be tough in these first 6 games, but it's going to be a good round road test here as they go into a week 7 bye, and then they go at San Francisco, at Atlanta, host Philly, and then hosting Houston on Monday Night Football. Heck of a 4-game stretch there. I will say all those teams are probably betting favorites to at least be playoff teams at minimum, if not win their division. And so I think it's going to be a tough continue that barometer test for them. But then at Washington, hosting the Giants, that's not in Turkey. That's on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Brian, just to make sure.
Yeah.
And then hosted Cincinnati as well, Monday Night Football. A lot of primetime games for them. Apparently people want to watch the Cowboys on primetime. But super tough stretch during this time. Washington and New York are going to be the easiest of the teams on paper, but it's still a division game. And so who really knows how these guys are going to develop. But this middle part of the season is going to be very tough for them.
Yeah. It starts off with a bye, and luckily they get at San Francisco coming out of the bye, so they'll have an extra week of rest, an extra week of preparation. But that's a really tough matchup, especially on primetime. At Atlanta is not going to be easy. Philly, I mean, I think they've split the last couple seasons. But Philly, that's going to be a tough game. Houston could be one of the best teams in the league this year. They remind me a little bit of the Packers, just kind of how they're being built up. And then, like you said, 2 division games. Cincinnati should have a good resurgence. If they come out, what is that? That's for 7 games. If they come out 3-4 in that stretch, I think that would be deemed successful.
Well, so 3-4, and then let's assume then as well then they go 3-3 in that first stretch. So they're sitting at 6-7 now during that range. And I will say a favorable final 4 games of the season. All these considered at Carolina, Tampa Bay, at Philly. That's gonna be their toughest one, but then hosting Washington. I mean, maybe Jaden Daniels and them can explode, and this can be a tough game. But I'm as of now going to say they're going to be favorable in 3 of those 4 matchups there. So they have a very tough schedule here. I think combine that as well with some of the question marks when it comes to their offensive line. Dan Quinn moving on as a defense coordinator, then losing some other pieces on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's going to be kind of what goes into my record. And actually, if we did that exactly, that's kind of what leads up to my record. Is not. I still think they're going to be an above 500 team. I still think they're going to be probably the favorites to win the NFC East. Kind of to see how the training camp goes and the offseason goes when kind of looking at their offensive line here and how guys develop. But I think they're going to beat the teams that they're going to beat. That they need to beat, like the Carolinas, like New Orleans. I think they're going to beat Pittsburgh, those teams. I think they're going to struggle against playoff caliber teams. I think that's where their issues are going to come in. And can they go and win the games that are going to be shootouts? Because I think they're going to have a lot of games that turn into shootouts.
Yeah, and that for me, I think how I ended up at 7-10 is I think they'll go 3-3, 2-5 in that middle stretch, and then 2-2 in the second stretch. That's how I ended up at 7-10. I just think like this is what they've done the last 2 or 3 years. They've had the largest point differential over the last 2 seasons. I'm sorry. They've had the smallest point differential of playoff teams over the last 2 seasons, including in 2022. They actually had a negative point differential and were 10-7 or 11-6, and
Mhm.
were like in contention for that division. But it's because they whooped up on the bad teams and they got whooped against the good teams, and that's just kind of like they were just kind of stuck in the middle. And I think that's exactly what they are. Except last year they had a good year, they won the division, so now their schedule's just a little tougher, and they end up, I think, 7-10 and missing out on the division title.
Yeah, it's a lot of question marks here for the entire NFC East division. With all the teams in there, it's like, is Jaden Daniels going to be the guy, and how Dan Quinn going to do with them, with Cliff Kingsbury coming back as his office coordinator? The Giants, is Daniel Jones, was that just a fluke season? Are they able to turn it around? The additions on the offensive line, are they going to have a serviceable offensive line? Philly, I mean, they had an epic collapse the second half
Yeah.
of 2023, and they were just an absolute shell of themselves compared to how they were playing in the beginning of the year. And then Dallas as well, probably one of the best Cowboy seasons I've seen in a long time. And they got blown out at home against Green Bay Packers team, but it was just clearly better and younger, better
Yeah.
all around. Uh, and I think then you go into the offseason and then you include the pieces that they lost. Very curious just to see how they combat. And I think I go 9-8 just because I think that they're going to be more of a playoff team. If I didn't think they're going to make the playoffs, I probably would have gone 8-9. Yeah, and so there's
Yeah.
just a lot of question marks with this Cowboys team.
Yeah, for sure. And that for me is concerning, especially when you look at how they start. Because I think this Cowboys team could get demoralized fairly early on, especially if they go 0-4 in weeks 8 through 11. That
Mm-hmm.
would be hard mentally to come back
Yeah,
from. So
yeah.
let's go ahead and wrap up this video here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Dallas Cowboys 2024 offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? Also, while you're down there, let us know what you think their record is going to be in 2024. And other than that, we'll see you guys